we are in the summit of our Transport and Climate Change Week. Welcome to the last session of the day. This Transport Week this year has been decided to be online and it will be recorded. So every session will be later uploaded in our Changing Transport YouTube channel so you can review. So for that to happen properly, we have some etiquette rules that I would like to share with you. For the session going with the flow, please keep your microphones muted, raise your hand before speaking, and as people is already doing it, be active in the chat. Let us know where are you connecting from, what are your challenges and your experiences. If you are interested on being contacted to build your network, let us know, put your information in the chat, and then you will be contacted by the people. Turn on your videos if it's possible, and then also remember that this is a safe space, so be present and respectful. We want to be inclusive and safe space for every colleague that involves the global community of transport. So if by any chance you feel misinterpreted or offended by anything that is said in these conversations, let us know. We want to grow and improve, so there are 2 mails provided, and we will be appreciating your feedback in that regard. If you need any technical support, let us know to Transport and Week at kz.de, and we will be giving you the support needed. We have prepared a concept for the whole week, connecting the dots. It's about connecting layers, people, institutions, and we always invite our expert external that work alongside with us. And this is the case of this session where we are calling to action, aiming for more ambitious NDC. We have had a day of the climate commitment opened by Asia and the experiences steering towards more ambitious NDC. We learned about accelerating the decarbonization of trucks worldwide. We did a message to be delivered for the COP next week. And finally, we learned from the Hamburg Charta of Sustainable Mobility and how all the corners of the world are pushing towards a more sustainable transport and speeding up the race towards the climate commitment. This is why we are here, and this is why I'm happy to welcome the 2 institutions represented here, the WR, World Resources Institute, and SlowCat Partnership, who will be leading us through this session. And for that, a reminder, the session will be in English, interpretation will be given in Spanish. La sesión será transmitida completamente en inglés, tenemos traducción al español, así que pueden usar el canal de su preferencia para que puedan seguir la conversación. With that, I would like to give the floor to Benjamin Welle from the World Resources Institute for him to lead us into the session. The floor is yours, Benjamin.
Thank you, Andrea, for that nice welcome. So I'm Benjamin Welle. I'm Director of Integrated Transport at the World Resources Institute. I will get right into my presentation, which is meant to just give a global kind of overview of where we're at or where we need to go in the transport sector before we hear from SlowCat on the current situation of what's happening with the previous rounds of NDCs and where we're going. So we can go to the next slide. So transport accounts for about 14 or 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's economy-wide. If you look at carbon emissions alone, it's about 23 to 25% of fossil fuel emissions. And so transport is one of the biggest sectors that contributes to climate change. We can go to the next slide. At COP28, there was what we called the Global Stocktake. This is an official process agreed upon under the Paris Climate Agreement to periodically take stock of what progress has been made in the advance towards addressing climate change. And in this global outcome document that all of the countries to the Paris Agreement are part of, they agreed to a couple key commitments in the Global Stocktake outcome document of COP28, which you can see a picture of the folks celebrating their outcome there on the left. But there were some key things that have to do with transport in there. One was to transition away from fossil fuels across all sectors. This was a pretty big achievement of COP28. Second was to see a tripling of renewable energy. Third was to have a doubling of energy efficiency, of which about a quarter of the outcomes needed for doubling energy efficiency need to come from the transport sector. And then lastly, there was a specific identification of a transport in the COP28 outcome. This is the first time transport has been in the text of the COP20 of a COP outcome, and that was to accelerate decarbonization of transport through quote unquote multiple pathways. So those multiple pathways include a broad range of measures that include vehicle electrification, but also walking and bicycling, public transport, and the like to achieve fully the goals of reaching no warming of no more than 2 degrees Celsius and striving for 1.5 degrees. Now, nevertheless, there was no specific quantum identified, no specific target for the transport sector to reach goals. And I'm going to get into that in the next slide. The IEA recently released a report that assessed the commitments made underneath the COP28 Global Stocktake, and they actually noted that setting a quantified global goal for 2030 and beyond could accelerate action to decarbonize the road transport sector. Go to the next. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of some goals. One is to have an emissions goal. Second would be to have a goal that addresses the fossil fuel transition or fossil fuel phase out sector-wide. And third would be particularly for the land transport sector, which represents about 3/4 of overall emissions, to also have a goal on doubling the share of fossil fuel-free transport through a variety of means. So I'll get into those in the next few slides. This is from the IEA's same report. It shows that we need to have emissions in transport by 2035. And as you can see from the different colors here, this is coming from a variety of different areas that include electrification in the blue, but also avoided demand and changing travel patterns to more sustainable modes like walking and cycling, public transport, and the like. And then there are other ways that we need to address, such as in aviation sector through moving to more sustainable aviation fuels. We can go to the next one. This is also from International Energy Agency. It shows basically the pathways to overall sector-wide phasing out fossil fuels and scaling up more green energy sources. As you can see, we need to reduce overall demand in the sector by 2035 by about 25%. And so that includes shifting to public transport, walking and cycling. It also includes more efficient forms of fuel and vehicles like electric cars. But then you can see we need to scale up the source of fuels by electric vehicles and other forms of sustainable fuels significantly, particularly starting in the late 2020s and into the 2030s. Next one. And this is the call to action that SLOCAT SLOCAT has convened, co-initiated by WRI and many other global organizations, which calls for a doubling of the share of fossil fuel-free land transport. What's in this? Well, it's about shifting the vehicle travel to electric cars, to walking and biking, to fossil fuel-free rail transport, and sort of a collective goal that encompasses not just vehicle electrification, but how we need a holistic approach that includes what we call, the avoid, shift, improve approach. So these are the targets that NDCs actually on the country level could include or should include, that what we're trying to get in each sector across energy, transport, forests, water, to have particularly strong commitments in the NDCs to see targets that address sector-wide issues. And we'll get into some of this discussion in this session. Next slide. But doing so requires what we call the avoid, shift, improve approach. This has been an approach that's been around for some time in the transport sector, but we haven't fully embraced it yet in the NDCs, in country commitments. But it involves avoiding and reducing the need to have motorized vehicle travel. That means better urban development, more land use oriented around public transport, limiting trip lengths, and so forth. It involves shifting or preventing growth of vehicle travel through providing trips through public transport, through walking and cycling, through ride hailing, through keeping the ability of people to not have to have the economic burden of owning a car, and to move through these more sustainable modes. And then lastly, it includes improving the energy efficiency of transport modes. So this involves the vehicle electrification that we need to see take place, the 2- and 3-wheelers, the light-duty vehicles, freight vehicles, public transport vehicles, and lastly, fueling this system through more renewable energy, so solar and wind power, through more sustainable fuels. This is a full system approach that needs to happen through the avoid, shift, improve paradigm. I can go to the next one. I will just note, I want to note the connection to the subnational level. There's an increasing call for NDCs to connect to cities and what happens in cities. There's an immense emissions reduction that can happen through cities, as well as economic savings and job growth that can happen when mitigation is happening in the sector. We know that transport is a significant piece of what happened of emissions in cities. Cars, buses, trucks, these are all things we see every day in cities and where a lot of emissions happen. So making that connection is important. Go to the next one. And I'm almost at the end of my presentation here, but the last thing I want to mention is that few NDCs mention finance, though they are being asked to mention finance underneath the Paris Agreement. Right now, transport accounts for about 334 billion of overall climate finance. This is about 30% of all climate finance, but that actually needs to be scaled up even further. And we need to have what we call quality climate finance. And when we mean quality, we mean climate finance that is aligned with Paris goals. So taking that avoid, shift, improve, and also addressing things like adaptation and resilience. So I hope I'm giving just some key statistics and numbers about where we're standing now, but I am going to turn it over to Slowcat to give a more nuanced picture of where we're standing with the NDCs themselves. So thank you for the opportunity to attend and present, and I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. Yeah. Hello, and everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Nikola Medimorec. I'm the Director of Data Analysis and Research at Slowcat. Next slide, please. I see a lot of familiar names, so actually I think we can skip kind of the introduction, probably aware with Slowcat. And yeah, I will, my presentation consists of 3 parts, and we will talk about a little bit the situation on NDCs, and where we stand right now, and what we need to get towards 1.5 degrees Celsius. And then the last part, we'll talk about kind of the urgent action that's further needed on ambition, finance, and capacity, trying to complement also what Ben was sharing with us. So yeah, next slide, please. And then, yeah, you can jump in next. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so as you heard from Ben, also as you heard from many other colleagues probably over the last couple of days throughout the week, like transport has a very significant role in the global greenhouse gas emissions. I just want to highlight here that in 2023, for the first time in history, low and middle income countries are now emitting more transport greenhouse gas emissions than high income countries. And also, as you can see in this figure, even though we talk about like 14 or up to 16% of global greenhouse gas emissions by transport, if you look at country by country, you can see that transport is in many cases the second or even the largest greenhouse gas emitting sector among all the other sectors. And now in 2023, this is the case for over 50% of countries. So like in 50% of countries, transport is the largest or second largest greenhouse gas emitting sector. Next slide, please. Now, I will share with you some insights from our GIZ Locate NDC Transport Tracker, a database on transport emission targets and policies in NDCs and long-term strategies. Here now in this slide and in this map, you can see that kind of around 42% of second-generation NDCs contain some type of transport target, but only 16% feature transport greenhouse gas mitigation target. So these 16% are like 24 second-generation NDCs with a transport greenhouse gas mitigation target, and this is like twice as much as we had in the first generation of NDCs. So like a doubling of greenhouse gas mitigation targets, which is really great. But then, if you look very closely at these targets of these 24 NDCs, they only aim to reduce transport emissions by very few percentage, or many times they also just intend to slow down the transport emission growth compared to business as usual projections until 2030. As also you can see in the map, the NDCs with targets are mainly from Africa and Asia. So many of these countries are actually kind of relatively low in terms of transport emissions, or like they're very low baseline. So the overall impact is relatively limited. Next slide, please. Looking at mitigation actions, we can see that there are nearly twice as many transport mitigation actions compared to the first generation of NDCs. Here, electric mobility plays a very important role, and it's the most common mitigation action. 59% of second generation NDCs and 90% of long-term strategies contain actions on transport electrification. However, as also like Ben was showing us with the importance of the avoid shift improve framework, we can see that there's very strong imbalance. Improve actions dominate in NDCs and long-term strategies. Further, if we look at the share of passenger and freight transport, we can see another very strong imbalance. There are much more passenger than freight-related mitigation actions in the second generation of NDCs. This situation was actually better in the first round of NDCs, but yeah, it got worse in the recent submissions. But we need to acknowledge that freight transport causes nearly half of all land transport greenhouse gas emissions. So it's very important to like strengthen the role and put a stronger focus on freight transport mitigation. Yeah, next slide, please. On the topic of adaptation and resilience, actions on transport are relatively general, and often they lack any kind of detail or like very specific measures for transport modes, or specific actions for, let's say, for passenger transport or for freight transport. We identified only 8 second-generation NDCs that feature transport adaptation targets. So that's like, besides very superficial measures, we also have very low number of targets on adaptation and resilience. Many of these targets just ensure like climate-proof design standards by a specific year, or they try to make certain transport assets resilient within the next couple of years. Next slide, please. However, I think it's very important kind of to be aware where we stand right now. So kind of globally, the first generation of NDCs would have resulted in an increase of 3.7 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial average by the end of the century. Now, the second generation of NDCs leads to global warming of 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius, which is still far away from our Paris Agreement targets. Also, we have to be aware that the NDCs as well as long-term strategies do not show the complete picture of transport decarbonization efforts. For example, in this figure, you can see the situation in the Asia-Pacific region. Colleagues from the Asian Transport Outlook assessed 25 countries and saw that the measures in the NDCs only constitute for about 10% of total measures on transport mitigation and adaptation by countries in the region. There are many additional relevant activities that can be found like in national policies, transport strategies, like EV roadmaps, or many other policy or strategy frameworks. So it means for us that the ambition towards transport decarbonization can be raised by better policy coherence and by better alignment between national transport policies, NDCs, and long-term strategies. Okay, the next slide. Now on the last topic, here also the GSZ Slow-Cat NDC Transport Tracker plays a very important supporting role for many of our Slow-Cat's advocacy activities. Ben already kind of mentioned the call to action, and I just want to reiterate, it was launched last year by Slow-Cat in 2021, together with E3, ITDP, UIC, UITP, and WI, and the idea to call to double the share of energy efficient and fossil-free forms of land transport by 2030. I just want to highlight for this year, we aim to conduct several activities around NDC analysis, facts and figures for finance, and also kind of actions for capacity in order to really move from the pledges to 2030 targets and measures that can be really translated into the next generation of NDCs and can really put us on the path of achieving 1.5 degrees Celsius pathways. Next slide, please. For example, on this first area, we assessed how well the action areas of the call to action are reflected in the current second generation NDCs. For example, we identified that renewable energy in general is very well covered in around 70% of the NDCs, but then other topics like the close linkage between renewable energy for land transport, or for example, also capacity building or knowledge building for sustainable transport are still very weak in the NDCs. Then the next slide, please. Here, it's a slide with a list of several activities and several resources where you can see how Slow-Cat supports the political ambition and capacity building in terms of transport in NDCs. I would very much also recommend you to take a look at them. You can find most of them if you go to slowcat.net/NDCs, where all of these lists are kind of all of these products are listed, and you can browse through them. Also, the web page contains a summary of our NDCs library, where you can find guidelines, templates, tools, and much more resources there. And I think we will talk and go through many of these NDC templates later in our meeting. Yeah, and then I think next slide is just a summary. Says I thank you a lot, and if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. But otherwise, I pass it back to the moderator, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikola and Ben, and perhaps I can take it from there. My name is Alice Yiu. I'm the Director for Outreach and Communications at Slow-Cat, and I will be guiding all of us through the next segment, which is for the breakout sessions. We would like to organize ourselves into 2 rooms, each addressing a critical aspect of transport in NDCs. So we have one room focusing on exploring various strategies and approaches to align the transport sector with the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. So we'll focus on how different transport subsectors and regions can adapt and tailor different approaches based on their unique challenges and opportunities. And then we have another breakout room because we were talking about finance just now, and improving access to climate finance in transport is becoming increasingly important. So in this room, we will dive into the mechanisms available to unlock and scale up climate finance for sustainable low carbon transport projects. And it will be facilitated by Yiqian Zhang, Manager on Climate and Electric Mobility from WLI. So if Hayun, if I could call on you to please split us into 2 rooms, and we will come back at around 4:30 European time, where we can then listen to more resources on how to improve transport ambition in NDCs. So see you in different rooms, and we'll come back together at 4:30. I was I was actually asking Yiqian, how was the breakout session? I've learned so much. I had a great time. How was yours?
I think we don't have enough time to go through all the questions. But yeah, it's wonderful to interact with everyone, and also happy to report back to the bigger group.
Okay. Great. I mean, we also talked a little bit about finance too, and but in any case, we had a great session. I'm happy to perhaps say a few words, on behalf of the group, and then you can do yours as well. I'm going through my notes. Basically, we were tackling the hard question. We were thinking, what policies, regulation, incentives have been most effective in, let's try not to say reducing emissions. I think one of the key points that we were talking about is that we have to move beyond thinking that impacts of sustainable low carbon transport is just about reducing emissions, and countries need to know that when they're developing the next round of NDCs. But we talked about different subsectors across different regions, and thinking about some good examples that are coming out from there. We were looking at the different impacts that we're seeing in terms of non-motorized transits. We talked about that there are examples being cited, and we'll hear more about from the NDC templates from the PATH coalition on active travel, and that they have case studies from 20 different countries. The rail NDC templates also help to flesh out a lot of these elements on what have been successful, how to help countries to be specific, and that conditional NDCs for low and middle income will be very helpful in order to leverage just under what conditions will these ambitions actually be achieved. And we also talked about the importance of integrated public transport, walking and cycling systems. So it's not just that the single subsectors will be able to do the job, but that these different transport modes are reinforcing, and that we need an integrated approach to do that. We mentioned about the new action plans that are emerging for active mobility that talk about prioritizing people, places, and the processes. Really good tagline. And if Bronwyn, if you have the link, happy to you could share it here, or we can share it with the group later on. And we also talk about how we really need long-term and consistent applications to our approaches. That there's examples from Asia, and also example, difficulties also in the Caribbeans, and that sometimes it was very difficult to move away from the focus of electrification of some of the countries, and that we needed to help countries learn the importance of a forward shift, improve frameworks. And that we also mentioned about popular transport, which is still very largely neglected in NDCs, and we need a vertical and horizontal alignment in order to scale up transport ambition, and making sure that different ministries and government agencies across the government are talking with each other, and that there are organizations that are facilitating that process, and in this case that we're helping different government agencies to be able to work together and bring different stakeholders in order to have a more holistic, comprehensive perspective to implement their NDCs. So over to you, Yiqian, to hear what you have heard from your session.
Thank you very much, Alice. I don't know if I can share my whiteboard because okay, it's not possible. But anyways, because earlier we tried to use it so that folks can also put in the chat or in the notes, and then we have I think there are a lot of synergies, I think, with what your group has discussed. But basically we hone in on the challenges that the transport stakeholders face in accessing climate finance. And then there are a few key challenges I want to highlight. One, for instance, is related to policy frameworks for like existing, for instance, fossil fuel subsidies would actually incentivize the investment into low carbon and sustainable transport. And then there were also some mention about the connection or disconnection to the NDCs in terms of indirecting investment, and probably there's also some lack of coordination around different ministers between transport, finance, or climate ministries. And then there are also some discussion around the how the role of NDBs or DFI or development finance institutions and how they are aligning with the climate goals in terms of their lending or in terms of their funding opportunities. And then here, one very important issue is the lack of, for instance, methodologies or lack of tracking and monitoring of the project impacts, so that for instance, the potential GHG emission reduction, it's not well documented or it's not properly tracked, and then that also leads to, for instance, like lack of financing to these projects. And then we also discussed how, for instance, there's a requirement for co-financing in the countries, but often it's very difficult to secure that. And then especially with the low and middle countries, there's also issue of the use of loans. And if they're not concessional, that will also increase the debt level in these countries. And associated also with the high upfront costs of, especially with these new technologies like e-mobility or e-buses, etc. And then we also talk about like carbon market, how it worked or not worked for transport. So I think in terms of barriers, we really discuss a lot. And then we also try to look into the possible solutions or how the countries can position themselves to attract international funding. And then one idea, for instance, also is related to how NDBs could play a role and how they could include like safeguard guidelines, which include climate-related impacts as a condition for financing, or how to shift existing investments to sustainable modes. And again, like an innovative financing mechanism or some existing mechanism like carbon markets, how it could work for the transport sector. And we also have some key messaging just in very short term for COP29. I'm also happy to share here very briefly, perhaps, if I may. So there are several key ones. One related to create national transport climate funds to absorb climate finance. There are also some call to action to set sectoral targets or to set like overall new quantified finance goal, and also to set specifically transport finance. I think that will be all. Thank you. Back to you, Alice.
Thank you very much. It sounds like a really fruitful discussion over there as well. So I mean, one of the great things that I was hearing from the discussion just now is that we heard a glimpse of the NDC templates that our colleagues have prepared. So having had that discussion and keeping that in mind, now we would like to introduce our colleagues. We have the following colleagues here that will share with us what their organization has done to develop a template that helps countries to improve their NDC. So we'll first hear from Bronwyn Thornton, CEO of Walk 21, and also from the Path Coalition, to talk about the active travel. After that, I will speak on behalf of Philip Turner, the Head of Sustainable Development from UITP, to talk about the public transport template. And then I'll pass it on to Lucy Anderton, Head of Sustainable Development Unit from the UIC, to talk about the rails template. And then we will have Rita Mwabwat, the research lead for transport for Cairo, to talk about the popular transport template. So I'll pass the time to Bronwyn now to hear about the active travel NDC template.
Great, thanks very much, Alice, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you. So PATH is the Partnership for Active Travel and Health, and we are a small coalition of the willing that wants to bring the conversation about the importance of active travel, of walking and cycling, to the climate agenda. In our breakout group, we talked about the challenge of actually measuring emission reduction when you don't generate them in the first place. And so we wanted to bring the value that walking and cycling have and articulate that. And so we formed the PATH Coalition with a number of other parties, and we obviously represent the walking side of it. So you'll find that bias in some of the stats that I'm sharing here. But the first thing we wanted to look at is, what is the status of national policies and NDCs? And it won't surprise you that it was poor. And we looked at walking and cycling and found that of all the countries, 197 we looked at, only 8 only 8 have a comprehensive NDC and supportive national walking and cycling policies in place. So when you think that these are the 2 core documents that are going to generate the action that we need and frame up where we put the money that we need and delivery on the ground, very little relationship between the NDCs and the national frameworks. Countries have national policies that are not reflected in their NDCs and NDC commitments that are not reflected in their national policies. So with this set of data, we developed a set of regional fact sheets, and this is an example on the screen that you can see here, which is from the European region. And as you can see that very few of those countries, only 9%, have an NDC about walking, that includes walking, whereas the statistic is about 22% globally. But when you look at that, you have a lot of national policy work that is underway to support walking and cycling, actually. What we did find is that there are more national policies for cycling than for walking than there are for cycling. So we wanted to make this real. So next slide, please. We said that we needed to give the world a template so that they knew what to do to improve their active travel policy. And the next one, but the template has to, and this is a really hard slide to read, but you'll get it in your resources and it's available through the PATH website. But the essence of it is not only to say this is the NDC, because we can't say what that is specifically, because each country has to raise their own ambition. And so they have to look at their current ambition and raise that ambition in this round. But we said you have to set that vision, and this is the policy framework that you need to implement that ambition through your national systems, right down to comparing it to outcomes in the global context like SDGs. Final slide, please, just because to keep it short and sweet, of course, but what does that look like in reality? And so having looked at all of the NDCs, all of the national policies, evaluated those national policies, come up with some data, we went back to find explicit case studies that articulate how countries are acting. There's 20 actions in the template, and what are the different countries doing it? And you can see on this map the different countries that we've selected, and the resource, which will be launched next week at the Climate Talks in Baku, articulates those different actions against those different countries to get the conversation started and the expectation around what can be done. And the last slide is just to say thank you for the opportunity. All of these resources will be available on the PATH website, which is pathforwalkingcycling.com. It's broken down into mode as well as combined resources. And we're here to help raise the ambition for walking and cycling in the next round of NDCs.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. So now I will speak on behalf of Philip, who is also now a colleague of SLOCAT, but unfortunately today he sends his apologies because he is at the World Urban Forum today. Next slide, please. About the UITP NDC template, public transport has a crucial role. I think we all would agree that a shift to public transport and active mobility is expected to halve emissions by 2030. However, a third of current NDCs do not have public transport strategies. So if all NDCs prioritized investments in public transport, emissions reductions can be achieved more effectively and economically than through technology alone. So to help governments, UITP has produced an NDC template that outlines how public transport can be included in their updates due next year. The template provides a framework for identifying and prioritizing actions that will increase climate ambition. It encourages cities to put public transport at the center of urban mobility by promoting its use, investing in infrastructure, and deploying low and zero emission vehicles. Next slide, please. So this template proposes 14 key actions grouped under 3 objectives: changing mobility habits, investing in people-centered urban design, and strengthening local governance for effective transport policy development and implementation. Monitoring progress is essential to ensure emission reductions and improvements in urban life. NDCs can do this by empowering cities to make the necessary changes. So UITP aims to inspire countries to adopt these strategies and stand ready to provide technical support to enhance the effectiveness and ambition of future NDCs. I'm going to leave the 2 links that will take you to read the templates and also an analysis done by UITP on NDCs in public transport. So with that said, I will pass over the time to Lucy, who is going to talk about the rail NDC for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. That's great. Yeah, and we've actually worked really nicely together with UITP and the Path Partnership on this piece. So it's not a coincidence that we all have templates. It's because we recognize how important we are to each other, and how much common ways of thinking, and we recognize the same kind of issues often in the NDC versions that are out today, and so therefore really enjoyed working together on finding these common spaces and aligning our work in here. So we have our rail NDC template, and I'll pop the link in the chat so that you can have a look at this as well. If you go into the next slide, I'll perhaps explain to those who are unfamiliar with the UIC, with the International Union of Railways. We're a global membership organization where people who run railways all over the world are our members, and we bring those people together to work on lots of technical issues, but we're also there as advocates for them and to bring their voices and challenges to these global forums. And so in doing so, we've developed this work in the NDCs. That's it. And last year we did the analysis, and we found that only a quarter of the NDCs talked about railways, so a bit better than walking and cycling, but not quite as good as public transport. We're somewhere in the middle from that, but even less actually had some specific targets when it comes to rail. So that's where they talked about rail, but perhaps not really in any real actionable or specific way. And so we really saw that where we are now is a great opportunity to really boost the aspirations for rail and connect what we know are actually a lot of plans and strategies that exist in those countries, but are lacking when it comes to their climate plans. So these QR codes will take you to last year's analysis and this year's template. So feel free to take a screenshot for those. And you can go on to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit more about the detail that we found and what the template is showing us. So we found that, as I say, the clear objective was not always there. So that's what our first recommendation in the template. Really be clear, what's the vision for railways in your country? And that really depends at where you are already. And secondly, look at the ambition. So there may already be lots of plans and programs to enhance the network, to electrify the network, and to bring modal shift to rail. So make sure those ambitions that perhaps are already there are clear in the NDC, and to register them there across the board. And then thirdly, there's this comprehensive element as well. So in none of the places did we see a really fully comprehensive NDC. So either they talked about passenger or they talked about freight, and maybe they talked about adaptation, but often they didn't talk about all three. And they might have talked about how they can drive modal shift, or how they could expand the network, or how they might electrify the network, but not normally all of those things. So that's why we have this matrix that we've got there to help show just all the different ways that you can integrate rail into your NDC in perhaps ways that hadn't been imagined before. Cohesive is really important. So we talked about it in our breakout session now, this horizontal integration. There's often plans and strategies in different parts of the government, at city level, in regional level, and even international level, which are not being featured in the climate plan. So bringing some cohesiveness to policy and to plans. To making it clear, so making the the information in the NDC actually trackable, measurable, so you know if it's working or not, and actually what's the time bound, what's the baseline of the targets that you're setting. And then probably the most important thing, the finance. So in your unconditional NDCs, we want to make sure that it's clear that the projects and the investment and initiatives is there and financed, and then also make sure you can put those extra opportunities in conditional NDCs, and that will really help climate finance flow, including where we see opportunities for carbon markets in the railways as well, where you must show additionality, and having that in conditional NDCs is perfect for the ITMO process, which will become more important with Article 6 becoming operationalized. And so with that, I'm just going to say thank you and look forward to more discussion.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So now I'll pass the time to Farida. Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen. Could you let me know if you see it okay?
Yes, we can see it very well. Thank you.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you also for the invite. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about the youngest, most recent NDC template, focusing on popular transport, previously commonly known as informal transport. We like to call it popular instead. A visualization. I'm sure you all know how informal or popular transport looks like. It's present in all modes of transport. A very dominant mode in countries of the global south, especially in like fast, like countries with rapid urban sprawl and high population counts. The name, differs from city and country to another. But basically, these are very popular transport modes and are used quite highly by the population. And according to a recent study by the ITF, it was found and estimated that about 12% of CO2 emissions could be saved if we were to apply the same amount of improvement measures that are applied for formal transport services, also to popular transport services. So bearing this in mind, we thought it was quite timely to develop the global NDC template for popular transport, because again, it is a very popular transport mode, with some countries relying to like up to 100% of their daily trips on popular transport. And on average, looking at countries again in the global south, GNPT estimates that about 70% of daily trips are made using these modes. However, despite their very common usage, they're not very popular when it comes to NDCs. So also to frame basically our approach, we are joining a sectoral effort. As you've just heard, we are basically following the same approach as done by PATH, UIC, and UITP for the different subsectors they focused on. It's very important to note that to us and to everyone involved, popular transport is essentially public transport. However, there are some characteristics related to the subsector, whether it's business models or service levels, the organization of the services, that are quite particular to the subsector, and therefore we think that it deserved its own template with very context-specific recommendations as well. Again, building on the framework of the other authors, we kind of looked into the existing templates, and we saw that with regards to status, for example, only 2 countries, in fact, mention popular transport, Angola and Uganda. There's no clear mention of, who the leadership figure or authority is in including popular transport in NDCs. There's no clear time frame. Ambition levels are also not very high. Uganda mentions one mitigation measure, which is electrifying the matatus, the electric motorcycle taxis, but nothing else. And so also funding, monitoring, and evaluation, how do we get there, is not as ambitious as we would hope it to be. And with that in mind, again, similar to the other templates, our building blocks for The templates basically focus on vision, goals, objectives, actions, and measures, and also how to monitor the progress there. With regards to our vision, it's a lengthy one, but basically we want popular transport to be sustainable, resilient, safe, comfortable, accessible, affordable, for both the workers, but also for users, publicly supported and integrated into the planning and national climate action, while also recognizing that they do in fact sustain vibrant local economies. Like, they take us places, they provide access where there is none, and also ensuring decent jobs and conditions for the workers. So here also bringing in the aspect of just transition. With regards to the objectives and actions, I'm going a bit fast, I'm sorry. But basically we have 4 overarching themes. The first one is basically also a prerequisite, following the concept of you can't really improve what you can't measure. So we need data. We need to identify what data is needed for the subsector. We need to maintain that data. So for example, how many operators are there? How do they operate? How many routes do they serve? How many passengers do they serve, etc. Also, I see a typo there, I'm sorry, but basically recognition and integration. So we need to recognize they do in fact provide a vital service, and we need to integrate them with the other more formal, let's call them transport offer of cities, and change the narrative from, we're banning them, they're not that great, and in a modern transport landscape, and instead integrate them to make sure that they do offer the certain quality standards that we would expect of a well-functioning and smooth transport offer. Also, of course, clean vehicles, that is at the forefront of the climate agenda, and as mentioned, just transition and adaptation. Those are the 4 main objectives, and underneath these objectives we list a number of action items. And what can be seen in common across all 4 modes is basically capacity building. There is a very strong need for capacity building with regards to how is this done? Is there some global best practice that can be applied? How to do so, with context relevance as well. And also participatory models. So how do we make sure, and we talked about this in the breakout room, how do we make sure that all relevant stakeholders are in the room and discussing the way forward in an efficient way? Just to give you a brief snapshot, we worked on this for about 5 months, I want to say, and we wanted to make sure that what we do deliver in the end is technically sound. So we had a peer review committee. I'm sure you see a lot of common faces, also Nikola, who's here with us today. And we also had an advisory committee. I think Daniel and Tim are also online, while consulting with the other template authors. So specifically, Ju from UIC, Lucy, and Jim from PATH, but also with Philip from UITP. And I'm happy to share that the draft template is online. It's not fully, how do we say, officially published yet. However, seeing how COP is right around the door, and we really needed to show and disseminate our recommendations, we have uploaded the draft on TFC's and GNPT's websites. I did not mention this in the beginning, sorry, but this is a joint effort between both of our organizations and also supported by TUMI. And yeah, I think that's all from my elevator pitch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Farida. Andrea, shall we hand it back to you? How would you like to do in terms of counting?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for every contribution and for the breakout rooms. I am in love with methodologies and processes, and I am so glad to see so many entry points to really support what is actually the biggest challenge collectively that we should be working for. So there will be a video in YouTube in our Changing Transport available for a lot of audience. We have above 1,500 registrations, so we have a crowd. But nevertheless, I would like to ask you, Alice, if you would like to share a key exit message with us, so we can grasp as a takeaway.
I mean, I don't know how long my message can go. I have put down a few words. I think we heard, first of all, that there's a gap, that there are potentials to close it. We've heard that integrated approaches for a forest shift improve is key across the different transport modes to offer a comprehensive perspectives for NDC ambition setting and implementation. We heard about boosting climate finance to fill in the gap, and COP29 is offering emerging opportunities to do that. We heard about diversifying and improving the specificity in climate action for transport. And we know that the community is ready to help with very specific resources and capacity building solutions for countries to do that. So I think that would be my key takeaway from today's session.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everyone. I think we are closing in a very high standard, mood, and knowledge our commitment to climate or climate commitment in our conference day online for the Transport and Climate Change Week. It's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, but also it's an opportunity. It's a trigger for change and for us to collectively work together, learn from each other, share our experiences, as we saw today, the methodologies from different perspectives. And we had a nice day starting from Asia with a strong flag on NDC commitment. We went through tracks, we wrote a message, and now beautifully led by you to all of these methodologies available for countries to be more ambitious. So can I say there's no excuse to be ambitious, there's no excuse to not commit. And I will say thank you very much, and I will share what's coming next, because tomorrow we still have Transport and Climate Change Week. Give us your feedback. I'm sorry, I'm messing things out. Give us your feedback. This is a QR code. This feedback is for the organization, so we can improve, we can collect new ideas for the next version of our Transport and Climate Change Week. And in the meantime, you do that, I will happily introduce what's coming next. Today, we, of course, will have a nice, satisfying, fruitful dinner, knowing that we have had a nice journey. Looking forward for what's coming tomorrow, tracking change, the next challenge. How do we track change? And then we will start by the transformation of the sectoral contribution to the UNFCCC reporting. And then we will close with the other. Today we heard from Hegazi saying that there's one part formal decision making, but it's the other side, citizen active participation and involvement. So this is our design as well. Connecting with African think tanks, it will be the closing session of our Transport and Climate Change Week 2024, fully online, with a very nice participation worldwide. So by nothing else to say, I wish you all a nice evening, nice rest of the day for the Latin American side, and we see us tomorrow, 8 o'clock European time, to track change on transport transformation. Have a nice evening. Bye.